Frank Klose, our Phillies insider, is back for another edition of the Phillies Mailbag here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Frank, long time no see. How you doing, man?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I feel like every time that you are out, Mike Gill sees you and I don't because I'm back here in the studio.
Yeah, you're stuck in the studio. That's why.
Yeah, I don't get to talk to people very much. So, Frank, I got a bunch of things I want to hit on with you. Before we get to some of the mailbag questions, I do want to ask you, because I said in the last hour, I think Taijuan Walker returning is a blessing in disguise, because to me, this pitching staff has been asked to do a lot of roles that really is not their skill sets, right? You have Kerkering being an opener, Kobe Allard getting all these innings, Hoffman coming in the games earlier. I mean, you could argue that Taijuan Walker is not the best pitcher, but if he can go 5-6 innings, only give up 3 to 4 runs, and you can get those guys back to their normal roles, shouldn't that help this bullpen recalibrate?
Absolutely. I know he's not the popular name, but let's face it. Look, the Phillies are already down Spencer Turnbull, right? Ranger Suarez is also out. That's putting a lot of pressure on this Phillies bullpen. And to me, the big moment that really said this is why you need a Taijuan Walker was in Seattle. Jeff Hoffman comes in the 6th inning, and he's struggling a little bit. Ends up giving up 4 runs, as everybody knows. But in a normal circumstance, you go yank Jeff Hoffman once you realize he doesn't have it that day, right? Instead, you have to. If you're Rob Thompson, you're thinking like, okay, well, I got to get through 4 more innings. We already used Orion Kerkering for an inning to be the quote-unquote opener. So that puts them in a really tough situation. And then if you've overextended everybody that day, then what happens the very next day? Well, then everybody was overextended yesterday, and then you have to be careful how you use them again. It's a big trickle-down effect. And if you think back to when the Phillies were rolling all over the place, over all their opponents, it was when they got deep starts out of all the people in the rotation, including Walker, going deep into games, and the bullpen was not overworked. So, you really can't emphasize enough giving Walker the ball and being able to come in and give you 5 innings, for sure, even if he gives up 4 runs. He also didn't screw up the bullpen for 3 days in a row, right? Because once you get onto that bullpen tangent, so to speak, where everybody is out of whack and out of turn, then you end up saying, all right, well, here you go, Junior Marte. Come enter this game and try to protect the lead or keep you in the ball game. And next thing you know, it's all over.
The Phillies lineup just came out. It's being brought to you by Clark's Moving and Storage of Rio Grande. Moving is a breeze with Clark's Moving and Storage. And I think that this lineup, Frank, has a little bit of a connection to one of your mailbag questions, Frank, because today's lineup, it's Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Bowman. And that lineup pretty much never changes, except for injury. But then in the 5 spot, it's Bryson Stott, followed by Nick Castellanos, GT Romuto, Brandon Marsh in left field, and then Johan Rojas in center. And the reason why, for those who didn't see Frank's mailbag yet at 97.3 ESPN.com, I bring up that is because Dave mentions on the mailbag, Frank, about Bryson Stott's struggles. Now, we'll get to the further part of that question in a minute, but are you surprised to see the struggling Bryson Stott bumped up to the 5 spot in today's lineup?
Here's the problem. They don't really have a lefty to put kind of there. And if you think about it, they've tried Brandon Marsh. He hasn't really claimed it per se. You had really hoped that would be Bryson Stott, who can make a lot of contact in the middle of the lineup, to basically be a left-handed Alec Boehm. You kind of saw that promise from Stott in the past. And unfortunately, he's been struggling a lot lately and really not being that. For someone, this happened to Alec Boehm too, kind of as a sophomore slump. The guy that you thought would make contact all the time, all of a sudden is swinging out of his boots and his head's in the air and he's missing everything. So I got to think that he can work this out. But if you think about it, though, there's really no other obvious left-handed bat to put there. If it's not Marsh, if it's not Stott, what are you going to do? Start Cal Stevenson and make him your number 5 hitter? I'm not sure they're going to do that right now, right? No. So, this is one of those situations where they got to hope that he can come through and hopefully matched up against the Marlins. Last I saw, the Marlins still didn't know who they were going to start tonight. but they have a lot of righties on that staff, so this would be a good time for him to maybe try to hit his way out of it. I mean, just think back to the last postseason, right? That grand slam against the Marlins. Maybe memories of that will help ignite him again. But yeah, it's really surprising to me. I thought someone who makes that much contact would have an easier go at this. Just like I thought Alec Boehm during his slump was going to make a lot more contact. But in Major League Baseball, they find ways to make changes to their approach to you every single time, right? They saw Bryson Stott a lot last year. They kind of figured out how they're going to pitch him, and then it's up to him to make those adjustments to that new pitching plan, and we're kind of seeing that play out. So hopefully he can work on that. And I think with Kevin Long in the major leagues, that's the way to do it.
By the way, as of right now, it looks like it's going to be an opener tonight, Frank. It's a Valente Balazzo is the guy going for the Marlins. And you're right, he is a right-handed pitcher. So that kind of lines up with what you were saying. If I could ask... Really go ahead.
I'm just going to say, and either way, the Marlins are pretty righty-heavy, if I remember properly. I mean, they had one of the best lefty relievers in the game, and they traded him. So they're catching the Marlins at a real time of flux.
Yeah, they traded Tanner Scott for half the Padres farm system, basically. It was crazy.
Yeah, and A.J. Puck to the Diamondbacks. Right. Just faced.
But back to Stott for a minute. I was asking this question yesterday, and I wanted to bring it up to you today, because people keep getting frustrated about, why are you platooning Sosa with Stott? Like, why are you sitting Marsh against left-handed pitching? And I don't understand, Frank. Like, is there like a short-term memory of like the '93 Phillies were beloved and that half the team was platoons, right? So Morandini didn't start every day. Jim Eisenreich didn't start every day. But it's like in today's baseball, it's like we have to start Bryson Stott every day.
Yeah, it's a little interesting. I mean, especially when you consider how well Edmundo Sosa did in Trey Turner's absence.
Right.
And everybody was calling for him to start every day. They were saying, throw him in left field and start him every day. Well, so I think it's good that he gets those at bats. And, Edmundo Sosa has shown some great promise at the plate, but he also gives you a very reliable defense. So, I think it makes sense if you're the Phillies to try to, when you're facing some tough lefties, make sure you give Edmundo Sosa his at-bats there. It's not, even if it's not a straight platoon, you want to see him, when he's going to play, be in a situation like that.
All right, friends, let's get some of the questions in the mailbag. The other part of that question I mentioned on over 973 ESPN.com was both Dave and Eric asked you about Scott Kingery, which I loved when you opened the answer by saying, for some reason, Scott Kingery is once again a topic. Because I feel like no one has talked about this guy forever. And all of a sudden, in August of 2024, here we are talking about Scott Kingery all of a sudden again.
In some ways it's puzzling, right? Because his major league contract, he signed it before he ever played in the major leagues. 6 years, $24 million. That expired at the end of last year. And what ended up happening was the Phillies still had the years of his minor league contract available because he signed that major league deal. So they got to keep him. And, I thought they would have just cut him and let him try to land somewhere else. But they decided to keep him. Spring training, he got to play, show what he could do. Didn't impress him enough to make the team. And, and he's been okay at AAA. I mean, he's been batting .279, a decent OPS. But, I think you saw with Scott Kingery, if they didn't call him up when they called up Cal Stevenson, I don't really see a path for him at this point. Now, Austin Hayes went down with that injury. Now, granted, they gave Cal Stevenson a shot, who is a natural outfielder. He plays center field, which is nice because he's got a decent glove. But, it's just really so hard to envision a scenario that the Phillies would end up calling up Kingery. I mean, the last time it happened, it was after a COVID outbreak and they were out a bunch of players. That was, 3 years ago at this point. They all run together, the COVID years. But, I think that, he's there at Double-A or Triple-A, for depth. They would need to have multiple injuries, I think, because the Phillies still have 3 infielders on the 40-man roster that are not that are able to just come right up, right? That do not require that you have to remove somebody from your roster, right? They still have Rodolfo Castro, who they traded for last year at the trade deadline. He's healthy now at AAA. Cody Clemens, right? He can come up and fill in a pinch in the infield. And and beyond that, they also have Buddy Kennedy, who they traded for. The guy from South Jersey, right? So I feel like those three would be the options that would come up first. But yeah, I don't know. At the same time, I don't totally understand why the Phillies are hanging on to Kingery. But I also wouldn't be shocked if another team, you can't make trades anymore unless the persons are not on their 40-man roster. Maybe some other team is desperate, so says, "Hey, would you trade me Scott Kingery?" Maybe something's to be had there. I don't know, but I just don't see a path right now.
Frank Klose, Phillies insider from 97.3 ESPN.com. We're talking about the Phillies and the Phillies mailbag currently at 97.3 ESPN.com. Frank, I also like the question from T because it is a very layered and nuanced question because they said, I know a lot of things are going wrong lately, but what is most concerning to the Phillies right now, what could most likely bite them in October? And Frank, I got to say, my gut reaction to the question would be, I feel like myself and all of my friends keep having PTSD when I see this offense struggle because the offense striking out in the 2022 World Series and the offense completely disappearing in Game 6, 7 of the NLCS, that's what scares me. That could bite them. Is there something else, though, beyond that big picture, trauma that Philly fans have that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, Bryce Harper struggling, I think, has been a big point here, right? You always say that, Bryce Harper goes, so do the Phillies, right? And if you zoom out to his last 15 games, he was batting just .230, but if you zoom in a little closer, the last 7 games, he's now hitting .321. So there's some signs that he's kind of coming out of it. I think, for Bryce Harper, what really got me was hearing that he was wearing batting gloves than not wearing batting gloves, that he was borrowing Nick Castellanos' bat, to just try to get out of this, which made me think that, okay, it's all in your head, buddy, So I think what you're going to see with Harper as he starts to get going, you got to think he matches up nicely against the Marlins and the Nationals here. So hopefully he can get some things happening during this Phillies homestand. And then you kind of not worry about that. And, I think what happens sometimes when your star player like Bryce Harper isn't hitting, well, then the other players in the lineup try harder. They press harder. Like you talk about Bryson Stott, right? Someone like that might think, oh no, Harper's not hitting. I got to do whatever I need to do to go make up for that. Well, not how it works. I think they're best off when they can all relax because they know the big guns are hitting, and then sometimes the lesser, I won't say lesser players, but the ones further down in the order can respond a little bit better because they're more relaxed. So I think that's something which I think that they can work out soon. You don't think that Bryce Harper all of a sudden just became not talented, right? So you kind of expect him to come back and carry the Phillies team again. But the other part of this discussion too, what could bite them? You got to feel a lot better about the bullpen in the playoffs. Remember we're looking at the top half of the roster is the one that's impactful here when you go to the playoffs. That's why they were so successful in 22. The second half of the roster had more holes than they have now, but the front half was really good. So when you have Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola and hopefully a healthy Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez as your playoff pitchers, that bullpen's not getting stretched the way we were just talking about, right? So, unfortunately, the Phillies have lost a few games with the extended bullpen. That doesn't happen necessarily in the playoffs. So I think what's going to come down to this is, you saw the Diamondbacks. I know Mike Gill has talked about this a few times. The teams like the Diamondbacks were trying to match up against the Phillies with some of their deadline moves. So I think that's what it's going to come down to, the battle of the AJ Pucks that we just mentioned, that the Diamondbacks acquired, hoping to come in and face the Phillies left-handed hitters. Who wins those matchups? But I mean, in terms of there being one thing that would worry me about the team, I still kind of think Bryce Harper's going to get it going and sustain it. And Trey Turner, I know has struggled some too, but these are some star players who can just put the team on their backs and run. And meanwhile, at the same time, Alec Boehm is still firing on all cylinders. So, there's not one overarching thing that would really make me worry about this Phillies team right now.
It's interesting you mentioned about Harper because I've made this comment before, Frank. I have brought up numerous times because I will never let go what Dave Dombrowski a couple years ago when he said, we are going to out-hit our problems. That this organization built this team with the idea that they have this offensive firepower and that they have the hitters, they have the guys who can overcome a lot of their problems. And listen, at times that has been true, right? When Harper has been hot, other guys have been cold, right? Nick Castellanos is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Schwarber has been absolutely hot in recent weeks. Trey Turner had that stretch of, 6 weeks where he was absolutely unstoppable, it seemed like. So this team is streaky as a general principle, but I just have to wonder, Frank, was this team built with a flawed philosophy?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. I don't know that was built to outslug. I mean, part of the problem was the Phillies' homegrown core from the 2015 rebuild just flamed out. It really wasn't. It didn't yield a lot, unfortunately. Like the McPhail / Klentak rebuild just. Right. You really struggle to figure out what you got out of that, and really, it's been the free agent signings that have kind of led the way offensively here. So, I mean, I think with Dombrowski, I think his strategy was, of course, you have free agent signing Bryce Harper. They were able to at least with some of their prospects get JT Realmuto along the way, but they had to pay big money for these bats, and I think there's expectations that come with that. They really had no choice. I mean, if you look at the lineup, I mean, Alec Boehm is really the homegrown guy that's doing a lot for you. Stott, I still think he's going to come around. He'd be the other one. Drafted back-to-back years in the first round by the Phillies, but yeah, I don't know if it's a flawed philosophy other than it's kind of what Dave Dombrowski had to do. Because there wasn't enough in the system to really make this team a team. When you think about a lot of other teams that are really good, they're the ones who drafted Bryce Harper. They're the ones who drafted Trey Turner, right? So the Phillies are throwing money at the situation because they absolutely had to. So in a lot of ways, you could say that this is the best he could do with the circumstances he was given. I don't necessarily think he did anything in a flawed way. I think he's still, at the same time, even through this trade deadline, he's refusing to give up the talent in the system because he knows that the team is going to need some later, and trying as best as he can to fill the holes. And look, I know a lot of people weren't happy with Austin Hayes being the outfielder they got, but it's at a certain point you just can't keep spending all your prospects for stars or buying all these stars as free agents. You have to make it work. And I think Dave Dombrowski's done a really good job of making it work. And the sad thing is, when the Phillies rebuilt the 2016 draft, I mean, A.J. Puck, we've already mentioned him twice, might as well mention him again. Like, he might have been the best first-round pick out of that entire draft, and he's a reliever with a 6 ERA.
Right.
So, some of it was bad luck that the Phillies had no clear star to draft in that system. Mickey Moniak was the best they could come up with, followed by Adam Hastley, right? So, really wasn't a lot that they missed out on, but I think there's a combination of that. And really, the trades just didn't net them pieces. I guess the Cole Hamels trade via a trade for JT Realmuto with Jorge Alfaro in the middle was the one thing that kind of set them up for later. But Dave Dombrowski had very little to work with and just kind of had to make do.
Frank, before I let you go, I got to ask you about, we've had a lot of people the last couple of days. Nick Earnshaw was in with me last Friday and yesterday, and we've had a lot of people jumping on the text board, and they have complained about Rob Thompson. And I want to get your perspective on Thompson because I have my opinion, right? I have my perspective on the guy, but I don't want to preface or adulterate anything that you might say. So just, what do you say to the people who say that Rob Thompson is not a good manager or he is the problem?
Well, I read what you write on 97.3 ESPN.com, so I guess I kind of know already. But no, he is not the problem here. The manager has to balance the long-term season with what's in front of him on any given day, right? So the Jeff Hoffman example we just said, does he want to keep Jeff Hoffman in to give up 4 runs? No. But on that given day, he says, well, you know what? I can't risk blowing out this bullpen to screw me up the next 2 days, right? So you have to hang in there sometimes and try to do it. You got to give your starters a day off sometimes when you probably would prefer to have them in, and because they would give you the best chance to win. You can't do that. I mean, I think the better manager tool would be to see how he presses the buttons in the playoffs, where you're not worried about that, where the days off are built into the schedule. where you have your whole bullpen available every single time, right? But until then, it gets messy. It's like earlier in the season when I guess people were asking me, well, the Phillies going to win 100 games. I was saying no. Why? Because there's going to be these parts of the season where you just kind of have to suck it up and deal with things. You have to deal with injuries now and then. You need to not have your best relievers in the game. And so I think he is good in that he sometimes lets people struggle their way through things. Now, Junior Marte was optioned to AAA today, but some days he has to use Junior Marte. Why? Because it's good for the bigger picture. And now didn't get the results out of it, but he had to do it. So I think for a manager right now, it's half that, and it's also half managing the locker room, making sure there's good communication, making sure relievers understood their roles. Now, in the case of Gregory Soto, he didn't like his role, but everybody out there seemed to know what the deal is. They know who especially relief management. That's one of the biggest things that you worry about with the manager. Those relievers kind of know who they match up against on the opposition and when they might come in accordingly. So I think overwhelmingly he's done a really good job and highly respected in and around the game. And I just struggle to think that he's a bit quote unquote bad manager. Usually when people say that, they are almost micromanaging every decision he makes from afar with an overly critical eye, not seeing the bigger picture.
He's Frank Klose. Follow him on the Twitter X platform at Frank Klose with a K. Check out his Phillies Mailbag, the latest at 97.3ESPN.com. They join the Sports Bash every Tuesday, talking about the Phils here on 97.3 ESPN. Frank, appreciate the time. Good stuff today.
Always good to talk to you, Josh.